Bloody great.
How many words were your stories?
Yeah, good question. So mine was 1,533. I could not get it under 1,500, which is really quite irritating for me because I already cut 300 words out of it.
Mine,
yes,
rather interestingly, ended on 1212.
And yours?
Mine was 1,500 exactly.
Oh,
Ooh,
I
lovely.
knew you were going to be like really crisp with that. I had a feeling that you were going to be spot on with the word count.
Back in the late Jurassic, I did the Oxford University entrance exams, and yeah, this was 1983. Yeah, no, 82. Have you ever seen the movie The History Boys?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. I watched that in the cinema with a dry mouth and sweating palms because I did those Oxford entrance exams from a state school. And one of the papers there was a précis paper, in that you were given a large chunk of text and you had to get it down to a specific word count. And 40 odd years later, that is such a useful skill. Particularly when I'm working to a specific word count, when I'm editing, revising a book. Yeah. So basically, give me a word count, and you will get, 5,000 word story. You will not get 4,999 words or 5,001. You will get 5,000 words, or in this case, 1,500.
How did you find that word count? Because obviously, it's not actually a short story word count limit. It's more set by the timing of an episode.
Well, exactly. Well, yeah, whichever. I had to keep going. I was sort of looking in the corner of my screen. And okay, right, I've got n hundred words left. I've got right. I'm going to have to go back and trim bits of the world scene setting. I'm going to have to condense the horse race. I kept going back to trim bits out to give me the headroom I needed to reach the end, which was really quite interesting.
That's fascinating. So, did you end your first draft on 1,500 words? Like you were counting?
Yeah.
So, wow. Gosh, yeah. So I always find that first bit, the 500-600 words at the start, I'm clearly something's happening in my brain, and I'm going quite slowly, quite deliberately, and it feels like okay, I've got loads of time, and then I blink, and I'm at 1,400, and it goes really quickly, and they're like, oh shit, I haven't even started ending this. So yeah, that is a skill, and one well earned. It sounds like. But we've had people turn up with stories that were well over the word limit before, haven't we, Nico?
Oh, yes.
And it's never really a huge problem, but it is nice to try and give yourself some limitations because that breeds creativity, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Working within constraints is a very, very interesting creative exercise. I haven't done a lot of licensed intellectual property work, but I've done a few things. And I mean, I got more notes on a 5,000 word short story for Warhammer than I've had on some novels. Whereas with Doctor Who, I've written 2-3 stories for Doctor Who. The the guideline is the Doctor is never cruel and never cowardly. Off you go. So yeah, it is very interesting working within constraints. I think something every writer should try.
I feel like we have already started the interview section, so I'll just continue. But
so this is a good time to say that I have read Fear itself and did really enjoy it. So
that was exactly. I was going to ask this. Like, I know you're a massive Warhammer fan, Nico, and have you read Juliet's story?
I have.
I wrote that. My eldest son is a huge Warhammer fan. Well, they both are now, and indeed now are my nephews as well.
Contagious.
Yeah. Well, my husband and I met through wargaming and martial arts, so it's in the blood. And yes, it is. Writing a Warhammer story was very, very interesting to do.
I'd love to give it a go. I feel like I owe it to myself to at least try.
Yeah, definitely. I think you could write an absolutely bang short story for any of the because you just have such the wealth of knowledge going for you. Like I think you'd be great at it. I did to be honest. To my shame, I actually didn't know that they published short stories. I thought they just did the Black Library books.
Every so often they do an anthology.
Right.
Yeah, and I got an invitation to have a play. So again, I thought, yeah, how can you say no?
That must be really quite something to get an invitation to write for something like an anthology. That
Yes.
must be, yeah, really heady. Because I assume that you did go through a period of writing things on spec and then submitting them and trying to get published.
No,
No, go on, tell me more. How did it stop you?
I am not a natural short story writer. It has been said with perfect justification that my short fiction frequently reads like excerpts from a longer work,
Okay.
which I think is true of the story we've done here. And that could easily be the lead into something much longer and more complicated. No, I started with writing at novel length because that is my personal natural length for writing. And I wrote, must have been in my 20s. Wrote the classic Youth Leaves Home, Rites of Passage, world spanning fantasy epic, which is referred to now as the blockbuster fantasy masterwork. And if it had ever been published, it would have had been the size, weight, and had the same literary merit as a breeze block. I think it finally ended up as something like 250,000 words, 250,000. It had 3 systems of currency. It had flags. It had absolutely everything, apart from much originality. And of course, this is back in the 80s and 90s when it was a completely different world. When submitting a novel was a question of laboriously separating your perforated pages from your dot matrix printer and posting 500 sheets of paper with a self-addressed envelope, stamped self-addressed envelope, to a publisher in London and waiting for it to come back and thud like the harbinger of doom onto your doormat with a photocopied, skewed "Dear Blank, thank you for your submission. We are not interested in pursuing it at this time. We wish you every success in your writing career. Yours sincerely, no signature" letter inside.
No. The disrespect.
And yeah, I was this story went through so many iterations because I was gonna, when somebody pointed out a problem, I was gonna fix it in the rewrites, and eventually it got scarily close to being published.
Oh wow!
It
Cool.
actually got voted down 3-2 at an acquisitions meeting at one of the big publishers, and I am so glad it did.
Oh wow! Yeah, I bet.
Because with the benefit of hindsight, and this is well over 30 years ago now, if I'd been published then, I'd have thought I knew what I was doing, and I'd probably have managed a couple of novels which would have been fairly generic, fairly uninspired, good enough, and then I would have disappeared without trace. But what happened then was the manuscript came back to me, 500. I had a laser printer by then. No, probably an inkjet, thinking about it. 500 pages put onto the doormat. And it came back with the reader's reports, which writers are never supposed to see because they are brutal. They are absolutely brutal. And to this day, I do not know if that was a genuine mistake or somebody in that office thought, if this writer gets a serious reality check, they'll write something worth reading.
Wow.
And I read these reports and they were absolutely merciless, highlighting phrases that stick in the mind. The writer has clearly lost interest in her central character about halfway through. If she can't be bothered, why should I?
Oh God.
And yeah, obviously initially I was huge. Yeah, oh, how dare they? Blind to my genius. And it sat on a shelf for 6 months because I had a small child. And when I was getting enough sleep to feel bored, I got it off the shelf and reread it all and thought, they got a point. And they're right. And oh, yeah, there's actually no fixing this in the rewrites, is there? Oh dear. At which point I binned it and started looking for a fresh idea. And that idea ended up being, I was reading a lot of crime and mystery fiction. I still do, always have done, always read very, very widely, not just science fiction and fantasy, but all sorts of things. And at the time, the independently minded female private eye was just really coming to the fore in crime fiction. Val McDermid's Kate Brannigan, Sue Grafton's Kinsey Mulhone, Vera Wachowski, Sarah Paretsky. And I thought, how would an independent woman, a female hero who is not defined by her relationships with men, but is making her way through a high fantasy world on her own terms, how would that work? And that was the inspiration for the story that became The Thief's Gamble, which was my first published novel. And I only started writing short stories after that.
So that was literally the best thing that could have happened to you, and
Yeah.
truly amazing. So what's it like to go from that initial rejection to being approached to write a story because people know your quality and they know your caliber?
Short story or novel?
So in that case, I guess it was you were approached with a short story, but have you been approached to write novels as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. People. The Cleaving, my Arthurian novel, spun off a conversation with Simon Spanton, who's now a commissioning editor with Angry Robot. And he said, "You thought writing an Arthurian novel, Jules?" Nope. Any reason why not, particularly? Toxic masculinity, dead hand of the patriarchy.
Yeah.
How many reasons do you need? And he was, oh, I think you could have a go from a feminist point of view. And my initial response was, maybe. And the more I thought about it, actually, the more interesting the idea was. And I had a chat with my agent who said, well, you know, somebody makes a suggestion like this, yeah, you probably put together a treatment, yeah, put together some ideas, yeah, what can't hurt. And so I went right back and read various versions of King Arthur's story. As it happened, I'd already been looking at some of the Matter of Britain stuff for the Green Man book I was writing at the time, which was the Green Man's Challenge, because that's got giants in it. And I went back and read Mallory, the Mort d'Arthur, or however you're supposed to pronounce it, for the first time in absolutely decades. And I had forgotten how absolutely barking mad that collection of the misses. There is so much magic. There is so much mystery.
Oh yeah.
There is so many magic swords. Excalibur is just the start of it. And also, the powerful supernatural figures are female. And that is something that's also come through in the Green Man books. Because I've read and enjoyed urban fantasy for decades. Since it first emerged as a subgenre. But I have nothing to add to vampires and werewolves walking the mean streets of some dark American city. However, flip that template and you look at English folklore, where again, so many of the powerful, supernatural, scary figures are female. Jenny Greenteeth, various hags, the Lady of the Lake. And you suddenly realise, and Woodcutter's young son goes off on an adventure. He meets the witches in the woods. So I looked at that and I thought, yeah, actually, I could flip that template, couldn't I? And that's where the Green Man books started.
The Green Man books. I've only read the first one, but that is really engaging. The way that you've done that is really engaging. I was describing it to some people that I was recommending it to, and you could just see that their brains just switched on when they heard that it was set in roughly the modern day, and it was about how folklore was real. And it's the same. You're right. The same urban fantasy pattern of like, oh, this could be possible. That just gets people excited, and I really liked that it was all about sort of coppicing and knowing what trees are which and all that sort of thing. Knowledge that I would aspire to. Really enjoyed it. I'm finding it absolutely fascinating the way that you've tried your hand to so many different things in your career so far. And you mentioned earlier that you never write the same book twice.
That's the aim.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever been tempted, or has a publisher ever been like, could you just do this again 3 times and we'll call it quits?
Fortunately, no. I've never been put in that position. I know some writers who have, and I consider myself very lucky that I have not. And these days, I would just say, yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that we always like to ask is, who inspired you to start telling your own stories? Where does that journey start for you?
Always made up stories. When I was young, and I'm talking, preschool, I got a brother who's 2 years older than me, and he went to school at the age of 5, and he started bringing home Ladybird reading scheme books, and would sit on the sofa with my mum, and he would do his reading practice, and I would sit on my mother's other side looking at because this looked interesting and what was going on, and I wasn't going to be left out because younger sister. And that's how I learnt to read. And so I was reading fairly fluently before I even got to school. And my brother and I would be, we'd be put to bed. We shared a bedroom at that stage. My mother would read us a story. I remember she read us The Hobbit. She read us The Horse and His Boy, the C.S. Lewis. And she'd switch the light out, and I would start making up stories for my brother. Early things were things like, I suppose you call it very loosely fan fiction, but I think that's giving it far too grandiose a term for somebody who's 5. Bits of Noggin the Nog mixed up with bits of stories from, I don't know, anything I'd come across, from Mary Mungo and Midge to the Beano, probably. And I don't remember any of these stories, but basically I'd just make up stories until we both fell asleep.
As a big fan of the Beano, at least in my youth, I must admit I've not been keeping up with the storylines recently. Are there any beloved Beano characters who've made it into your work?
No.
Oh, that's a damn shame. I think there's got to be space for the Bass Street Kids somewhere, isn't there?
Dandare's the dandy, isn't he? There's more than a little occasionally of Dandare in Dan, the protagonist in the Green Man books. In terms of actually writing novels and writing for publication, what kicked that off was when we started our family. I had been working in personnel, but to go back to work, every penny I spent and after tax would have gone on childcare, and that seemed more than a little pointless since we had actually made a conscious decision to have children ourselves. So I was an at-home mum because, having bought our first house in the early 80s, we could run a mortgage on one salary. And I say this at science fiction conventions, and it's clearly the most unbelievable thing anyone's going to hear that weekend.
What was that like?
Yeah. Old. And when our eldest was a year, 18 months old, a part-time job came up in the local bookshop, our local branch of Ottakers, as was, and I was desperate to spend some time with grown-ups, not talking about nappies. And so I started working in the bookshop a couple of days a week, and I started to see the book trade from the retail side. And I started to understand a lot more about how publishing worked. And I started to see that actually being an author was a job that I could fit around being duty parent at home with children.
Yeah.
And that really did focus my mind on writing with a view to publication.
Yeah, it's a great journey to get there. That
Yeah,
seizing of independence giving you the direction.
My husband and I, we've always been a partnership. We sat down and looked at the family finances, and his salary has always paid the bread and butter bills, and my writing income has always been the jam budget. And some years the jam budget has been a holiday in the Isle of Wight, and occasionally the jam budget has refitted the kitchen or the bathroom. When we moved house, we saved up book earnings for a couple of years, so we had a sizable chunk of change to put into that endeavour. So yeah, we are very much a partnership, always have been.
That's such a lovely
That's
setup.
lovely.
I know when we heard you speak at the Writing Fighting panel at FantasyCon, it was really clear that you have this incredibly strong relationship that means that maybe it doesn't mean that, but maybe it helps for you to just go for it with this, with all of the writing that you've done, and know how men think and feel, which is potentially quite a useful asset in what was potentially quite like a male-dominated field at that point.
Well, certainly when I set out. By the time my fourth novel came out, The Warrior's Bond, and of course this is again before the internet and social media got going, I met somebody at a convention who saw my name badge and went, "Oh, you are real."
Oh no.
Yes, okay. Which is how I found out that there was a persistent rumour doing the rounds that Juliet E. McKenna was a publisher's construct of a husband and wife writing team. Because my first 5 books, the Tales of Anarin, starting with The Thief's Gamble. Thief's Gamble has a female first-person narrator. Swordsman's Oath, the second one, has a male first-person narrator. Then we go back to the female narrator for Gambler's Fortune. Warrior's Bond, again, male first person. And various people were authoritatively saying, no, clearly this is a husband and wife writing team because a woman couldn't write such convincing stories from a male point of view.
Oh no.
That is a nuclear backhanded compliment, isn't it?
Yes, isn't it? Yeah.
Unreal.
So am I going to be pleased about that or absolutely furious? Flip a coin.
So my follow-up question there is about your pseudonym, J.M. Alvey.
Yes.
How did that come about?
That again was the marketing guys. Oh dear me, no, we can't possibly have serious historical murder mysteries associated with science fiction. Can't possibly put it out under your existing name. Okay, fair enough. And to be fair, there are actually sound arguments for keeping different writing personas separate, down to things like electronic point of sales data. So which again, this is where having worked in bookselling comes in. So yeah, okay. And I was talking to my then editor, and we thought, you know what, let's see what we can have a bit of an experiment here. So we'll go with the initials. Alvey is a family name that I asked some of my cousins if I could borrow, and they were quite happy for me to do that. And we'll go with initials. And I talked to Lou Abercrombie, who did my author headshots, and said, how androgynous a photograph of me do you think you could take? Which again, she found a very interesting creative challenge.
Yeah.
So I parted my hair differently. I wore contact lenses instead of glasses, and I wore a collared shirt and a plain sweater. And people did not know that photograph was me.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, very interesting exercise. And there are reviews of the first of those novels by people authoritatively stating, Alvey clearly knows his period. And the bio is gender neutral. We put a lot of there are no clues in any of the publicity material about those books to indicate the writer's gender. And the number of people who assume it must be a man is quite interesting.
I wish it was surprising. I really do.
I think it's fucking kick-ass to approach
Yeah.
a career like that. I think it's really cool. So were we counting your Alvi books in the 27 that we were
Yes.
talking about earlier? Yeah, we
Yes.
were. Right, good.
No, if you said actually no, there are another 15 that I didn't.
Yeah.
I was gonna have a panic attack.
God
Can't be in a
damn.
room with someone who's written that many books. I'd cry. So
I mean, people say, "Oh, one a year." Well, yes and no. I mean, that's the average, but there have been massive up and downs in my career, and this is one of the things that being able to take the long view. Bearing in mind, I signed my first publishing contract in 1997, so yeah, we are coming up on 30 years in this game. Being able to take the long view is incredibly helpful. When it has all looked as if it's about to completely hit the buffers, which has happened a few times. Having a very supportive husband who is not a writer is incredibly helpful. Yeah, there have been points where I have been ready to, just chuck it. And he has talked me down, and he's always said it's up to you, but have you considered X, Y, or Z? So yeah, this is one of the things about it's never smooth sailing. So
now we know that you are a feminist, but
yes.
do you feel particularly connected to any other cultures or subcultures? And if you do, have they shaped your writing at all?
It's an interesting question. My father's family are Irish, and you wouldn't know that to hear me speak, and you, unless you know, you are familiar with the island of Ireland, you wouldn't necessarily know that to look at me, and you certainly wouldn't know it if you go by my married name, but McKenna is my maiden name. And so, very early on, I became aware that the version of Irish history I was getting from a girls' grammar school in true blue Tory Dorset, and the version of Irish history I got at my Granny McKenna's knee were very substantially different.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
So I've always had that slight outsiderness, and also, growing up in the 70s and 80s, with during the Troubles, with Irish Republican terrorism, a serious thing. The playground could be a fairly unpleasant place at times. So that I've always had that sense of having a foot in two camps,
Yeah.
between two worlds, and also always looking behind what people are saying or their motives and why they're saying what they do. So I suppose that's probably as much of an answer as I got to that question.
No, I can see it. It causing you to unpack people's characters as a defense mechanism, and then later on being weaponized as a creative tool is.
Yeah, I mean, I visited Ireland as an adult, and I've been into shops, and before I've opened my mouth, whoever's behind the counter has said, "Oh, you're over here visiting family, then."
Oh, really?
Oh
Wow.
yeah, yes.
Fascinating.
We definitely didn't get that when we were in Dublin.
We did not. No, we loved it though. Had a great time in Dublin.
Oh, what a
Were you over
wonderful
there to
place.
work on?
Say that again for me, sorry.
When were you in Dublin?
Oh, this was a few years ago.
3
Nico,
years ago, yeah.
got married, and
Oh,
I was his best man, and we organised going to Dublin for this trip. He actually didn't know we were going.
No.
He thought we were going just in London, and then I took him to we took him to the airport, and it had a really good time in Dublin, including actually at one point not having to sort of go off piste off our itinerary, which I know doesn't sound like it was fun for a stag, but it was quite a lot of fun. We needed something else to do. We went to this waxwork museum in Dublin, and I don't want to denigrate it at all because it was a fantastic time, but the waxwork was a little bit lacking, and we just laughed our way around it, and we had such a good time. Some of it was like legitimately really good. There was a really depressing bit about the like the famines and that sort of thing. Right next to a room filled with like Harry Potter and
like
the
SpongeBob and
yeah, it was
Lord.
truly bizarre. And a waxwork Hannibal Lecter that was supposed to shake if you put like a pound coin in
Lord.
or a euro, sorry, in it that did not work.
If you
Yeah, no, we had a
you get
great
a
time.
chance to go over to any of the Irish conventions, they are, as the phrase goes, great crack.
Great
They're,
crack. What are the
but,
key ones to go to?
Octocon, which is in Cork this year. Adrian Tchaikovsky and Katie Murphy are the guests of honour. There's a new one happening in Belfast, NornCon, I believe. I think Anna Smith Spark is one of the guests of honour on that. Ian MacDonald. And the Irish convention folk, there's a couple of gaming conventions, I think, over there. And they did a brilliant Worldcon in 2019, and I think they're hoping to bid for one in 2029. Yeah, good fun times at Irish conventions, and heartily recommend them.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I'll
very much
definitely.
up for that.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. The next Fantasy Con's in Scotland, isn't it? I think. Yeah,
Glasgow.
Yeah.
looking forward to it. Right, so we always ask. Would you like to ask this question, Nico? You'd like to ask this one?
Oh, well, it's not so much a question, is it, Ben? It's just telling the truth at last. we're going to give up on the hypotheticals here, Jules. See, we're being held hostage by a powerful and capricious bibliomancer. And this story sorcerer, he draws his energy from people's love of books. And the only way to satisfy his, let's call them demands, is to give him book recommendations from talented writers such as yourself. So to spare me and Ben from this episode ironic whip, could you answer one question? What novel is the closest to your heart right now?
Mine or somebody else's?
Oh, it could be either.
Oh, I'm useless with these questions.
I would be fascinated to hear which of yours is closest to your heart first. Maybe that would be really interesting.
It tends to be the one I'm working on at the moment.
Right.
And at the moment, I'm working on this year's new Green Man book. But I can't tell you anything more about that because spoilers. And that is absolutely consuming my waking thoughts. I wake up with interesting ideas on how to tweak the bit I'm going to write next. In terms of what I've read recently by other people, again, it's the book I've read most recently. I've just read Water Dance Peril by R.J. Barker, which is really interesting. And talking about economy of world building, he's absolutely masterful when it comes to that. And there's a ticking clock because a guy who basically can read the last thoughts of the dead gets accused of murder. And if he can't find out who the real murderer is, they'll just execute him anyway because that's close enough for government work. So yeah, those are the books at the forefront of my mind just at the moment, and
Great
that's as
answers.
close as you're going to get to an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. We used to ask people what their favourite book was, but it was too mean, so we slightly tweaked it. But feel free to answer that one if you've got it.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. Yeah, okay, I thought so.
Also, reset the clock. RJ mentioned. It's always we know you're listening, RJ. Yeah, be proud of yourself, you lovely, talented man. You.
There's been a few names dropped so far, which we have absolutely loved speaking with. I know Anna Smith Spark was an amazing guest, Adrian Tchaikovsky, and RJ Barker several times. I often feel tremendously lucky to get to speak to people such as yourself, Juliet. And
One of the great things about the science fiction and fantasy community is the nice people you meet, and this is one of the great things
yeah,
about conventions. Um, I can't actually remember the last time I got the "Do you know who I am?" treatment from anybody, because people just don't do that.
no,
No.
yeah. I mean, we've plugged it a lot, but we've obviously been to FantasyCon twice now and had a fantastic time both times. And it's down to the people and the
Yeah,
volunteers that run it, obviously. But
Mm.
but yeah, the actual like the vibe of the people, you can't beat it. You feel at home immediately. It's lovely.
It's immediate community, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is just a wonderful place to be. Oh, I
Um,
feel all warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, lovely. I'm going to slightly break that by asking potentially a contentious question, Juliet, and feel free to say that you don't want to answer it. That's absolutely fine. But do religion or faith play a role in your storytelling?
they do, because I am very interested in what makes people tick
Hmm.
and motivation, what drives people. The old acronym for spy thrillers used to be MICE. Money, ideology, conscience, and what was ego? Yeah, I think E was for ego. There are all these various PESTLE, politics, economics, something else, legal, technology. There are all these acronyms. What drives people makes me tick, and faith and religion has always been a very, very powerful influence on societies, on so many
Yeah.
societies. So yes, I don't work with existing religions because I am not religious. I sang in the church choir for many years, but that was primarily for the music. Um, and I'm not about to sort of tread on anyone else's beliefs because I think that's frankly rude. But the way that religion and faith drives people, the way it can be a spur for good, the way it can be abused and misused, I find absolutely fascinating, and it's a recurrent theme through history. So yeah, and it comes out in some interesting ways actually. In the Old Russian Compass sequence that I wrote, I sketched in a pantheon and gods and religious system into the first 5 books of Tales of Anarin as part of the general world building to make a good rounded 3-dimensional society. And one of the things that I'd sketched in was that this other culture, the island culture of the Ardebrechen archipelago, does not have religion at all, but they rely on fortune tellings and omens and portents and reading the skies. And I've put together what turned out to be an incredibly complex belief system that, as the books developed, turned out to have more of a influence on that society than any religion possibly could. It was really, really interesting to see how that developed. One of the really fun things about world building in fantasy is when the elements you put together start to generate their own heat. The whole thing develops its own energy, its own momentum, and it takes you places you didn't really expect.
I think it's a great answer.
Yeah, it's a fabulous answer. I think off the back of that, I was interested just knowing that and your approach to it and how it feels when you're writing it. Is there a place that you would recommend people start reading your work? Like, what would be the first book that you would want people to pick up now if they hadn't read any of yours before?
Ah, well, depends what you're looking for, really. Um, well, Tales of Anarin, Livac, independently female-minded female gambler, working her way through the world, gets blackmailed into working for a bunch of wizards. Life suddenly gets very, very complicated. So that starts with the Thief's Gamble. The Older Russian
I hate
Compass.
when that happens, you know.
The Older Russian Compass starts with Southern Fire. Main character is a warlord of one of these island fiefdoms. He has absolute power of life and death over his people. He has ultimate power, and magic is banned from all these islands on pain of death. They do not like wizards at all. Bit of a problem when magic turns up causing trouble. And everybody's looking to the warlord saying, well, you're in charge. Sort it out.
Yeah.
So that, and again, his life suddenly gets very, very complicated. The Chronicles of the Lescari Revolution. What happens when the people who spend their lives being trampled into the mud for the ambitions of rival dukes decide they're mad as hell, not going to take it anymore? So that is revolution from the ground up. Federal crisis. From through the previous books in that world, wizards do not get involved in warfare. This is a given, because basically nobody wants to face a wizard in battle. Therefore, you're not going to enlist one on your own.
Yeah,
Think about rules. Yeah, think about rules. Someone's always going to break them. So, what does the Archmage do when somebody decides, actually, maybe I will get involved in warfare? So basically, yeah, if any of those appeal. Green Man. As we say, contemporary fantasy where creepy things in the woods and things that go bump in the night really do. But the guy, if you're in charge of when the mundane world and the supernatural are about to collide, Dan, ordinary bloke, jobbing carpenter, his mother is a dryad, so the Green Man has a tendency to tap him on the shoulder and say, go and sort out that problem. So that's the Green Man books. The Arthurian, the Cleaving. The central tale for Arthur is very, very male-centered. It's Uther, Arthur, Merlin. Women in those narratives tend to come on or off stage to be a bit of plot or to have a bit of plot happen to them. And they presumably they go and sit in a cupboard. Now, if you start drawing up their timelines, you see they spend actually quite a lot of time in the same place together. Guinevere, Morgana, Igraine. Think about women. We talk to each other. We cooperate. And if you start looking at the core Arthurian narrative from that perspective, again, some very interesting angles emerge. And if you fancy a bit of murder and mystery in ancient Athens between the Persian and Peloponnesian Wars, J.M. Alvey is your man. That's one of those is Shadows of Athens.
I love that, the way you just rattled through that and it was all just like right ready to go. It's fantastic. I have a follow-up question, which is that we've mentioned it multiple times that you have very different books each time that you write something, and from those descriptions you can really feel how different all of the approaches and characters are. Is there a unifying editing process that you have? Like, do you always edit the same way? Do you have like a particular method, or because the books are different, does that change necessarily?
I write 2 drafts. The first draft is get the story out of my head onto paper, and the second draft is get the story into a shape for somebody else. So I used to be very, very tightly prescriptive about my planning and plotting. I still do plan and plot. I never start a book without knowing the end, and I will know the roadmap to get me there. These days, I am more fluid about detours, distractions, diversions, because again, this is experience. Early on, I would desperately try and stick to my outline, even when it wasn't working, and I would basically waste time and have to get to a point where I go, no, sorry, not working, backtrack, try a different direction. Do that a few times, and you get to the point of thinking, hang on a minute, no, that is not the right track. Stop now before you waste however many writing hours. Think about it. Go a different way. Okay, it's going to cause problems. I'm going to have to rethink things, but it will ultimately be a better story. So yeah, I mean, and editing is a question of making sure that you've got the continuity correct. Editing is where you start to see the themes emerge. You start to see the underlying ideas. You start to see where you can add, the second draft. That's where you look at foreshadowing and the subtleties. That's where I can weave those in, where I start to see underlying themes. I don't ever set out to write a book about whatever, but when I'm well into a second draft, I will start to see what the underlying themes are, and then I can work out how to use them, how to play on them, how to use them for misdirection, how to use readers' expectation against them. How to wrong foot people. So yeah, that's
that particular bit of advice there, I know it potentially wasn't meant as advice, is incredibly useful to me. I actually had my head in my hands when you said that, because whenever I'm writing something longer, I'm always trying to hit the themes first. Like they're, you know,
no.
and it's a fucking nightmare, and you end up being like, oh, I'm just gonna have to put this to the side for a bit and just do character and do story. But I'm often trying to balance that, but knowing that someone of your caliber just allows that to happen naturally in the editing process is really helpful for me to hear. So thank you for that.
Novels should be people, plot, and place.
People, plot, place.
And you focus on those. You want those in balance. You want those working constructively with each other. Where people grow up informs who they are, which informs what they do. These things become recursive. Focus on that, and the themes will emerge naturally. And also, you'll find out ultimately that your work has themes that you absolutely never realised, but other people spot for you. That's always fascinating.
Can we just keep you as history corner / authorial life coach?
Font of wisdom, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. So you probably can't tell us too much about this, but potentially, what is your next project? I know you mentioned that it was potentially the next Green Man book, but it sounds like you might have multiple irons in the fire.
Well, the Riven Kingdom is the new fantasy novel, and going back to the question about faith, that's an interesting one, because I have got the religious system plays a large role in that. This is coming from Angry Robot later this year. It's a world I've been playing around with for a while now. I've written quite a few short stories in this world that are collected in Secret Histories of the River Kingdom, which you can get from Wizard's Tower Press. And you have a sun goddess and a moon god. And this is a world where, again, look at what everybody else has done and think, can I find a new angle on that? And if you put the sun goddess in charge of money, puts the priestesses in charge of the banking, and that leads to a very interesting power dynamic. And again, all these things flow from little bits of world building. You look at the consequences, and suddenly the whole thing just fans out before you. It's really, really interesting to do. So, that's what I'm tweaking the final edits on that as we speak. That's what I've been doing today, because it's been with Simon Spanton, who's editing it. One of the best things is fresh eyes on a piece of work. And I get, again, this will be my 29th novel when it's published, and every piece of work I've done, and again, this is true of short fiction, it's true of non-fiction pieces, someone coming to it with an informed but fresh perspective, and who's able to say, okay, what exactly, can you just unpack that bit for me here? Or I really love this bit, that's a really interesting idea. Can we maybe bring it in somewhere else? And asks questions about something that's really resonated with them, and that will spark ideas. The editing process is for me a very constructive and positive one. I once had a short story where I got the edit back and withdrew the story from the anthology because the edit was so appalling, and that's only happened to me once in nearly 30 years, and that was with one short story. So I consider myself very fortunate.
I think it makes sense with the thorough approach and the it's not really methodology. It feels like it's like an innate love of storytelling, especially after what you told us about making up stories for yourself and your brother to fall asleep to, it seems like it's been a natural process that you've augmented over the years with experience and learning, which is always kind.
And also, I've always been fascinated by stories. I've always been fascinated by history. And this is why I read classics at university. Because if I'd done a history degree, I'd have lost all my literature. If I'd done an English degree, I'd have lost all my history. Classics, ancient Greece and Rome, history and literature. I got the full package. So, and I got to Oxford from a state school to read classics many years ago.
Yeah. Oh, it's
I
impressive.
must say, I'm glad you did.
And it has to be said, again, this is going back decades. The system that was in place when I was a student was you wrote your 2 essays a week. You did all the reading, you did the analysis, you formed your argument. A lot of that is still very much the way I approach plotting a novel. And then you read your essay aloud to your tutor, who was frequently one of the maybe top 5-10 people in the world on that particular topic. And every so often they would just raise a hand and say, excuse me, Miss McKenna, could you elaborate on that point? And once you've been through that, I tell you, being reviewed holds absolutely no terrors at all.
Constantly vivering every week. Good Lord. Well, this has been a tremendous experience for me, and I hope you've enjoyed yourself. But just
A lot of fun.
one last time, do you think you could tell people where they can go to keep up to date with your news and that sort of thing? I know we did it last time, but it's always good to remind people.
I have a website, JulietEMcKenna.com, which I update the blog periodically. There's also a lot of background material on my books, the various worlds I write in, various things I do. There's a lot of stuff about equality in science fiction and fantasy, things about creative writing. Yeah, I've been at this a while, so I've collected together a fair amount of material. Go nuts, as they say. On social media, the platforms that work for me are Blue Sky, Facebook, and Mastodon. And I share things that look interesting. I boost what looks like good reading to me, and I have no time for intolerance or aggression. So that's very much my approach to social media. Wizard's Tower Press publish the Green Man books. They have a page for each title with a vast array of purchase options, national, international. So you've got lots of material there. And of course, you can find my books online at the usual mass market retail.
No, I would say goodbye normally at this point, but I'm not going to because, as previously stated, you're now a permanent fixture.
Oh no.
I've already begun the blood ritual to make it permanent, so I'll miss the goat. He's very sweet, but needs must when the devil or your equivalent evil spirit drives.
I mentioned my third Dan black belt in Aikido.
Oh no.
So you can defend us too from them.
Stunning stuff. All right, thank you so much, Juliet.
You're very welcome.
I very nearly called you Jules then, which was
Feel
fast.
free.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone listening enjoyed that. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?